Good afternoon. I'm absolutely delighted to be able to welcome you to today's session, where we will be discussing what do your audience really think. As an industry, we face many challenges which relate to changing consumer behaviour. In particular, changing the increases that are happening in consumer choice can lead to some very difficult decisions around measurement and around understanding audience behaviour. So the two companies that we're going to hear from today, they propose a solution to better understanding audiences in a fragmented market and to the overload of data that can actually lead to. Both companies, they tap into an approach that is very much at the heart of what we do at BBC Worldwide. In the case of CrowdEmotion, that's really digging deep in order to truly understand audience behaviour. And in the case of Rhiza, it's taking that understanding and ensuring that we communicate it throughout the organisation, the democratisation of data, if you will. So we'll have lots of time at the end for some questions, but in the meantime, let's kick off with Matt from CrowdEmotion.
Thank you. Can you hear me? Oh, wow, you can. So I come from a company called CrowdEmotion. We founded it 2 years ago. And we set it up to start understanding what could you tell us without telling us anything. What could we do with all of your smart device use? What could you actually do with that? And it came down to a question and a use case that we had within the BBC, where we were posed by the head of audience insights there, David Boyle. He was asking about the heartstrings and how he can capture them from around the world, understand them from an engagement perspective. And the best tool he had going was whether people liked or disliked a trailer. And when you're spending hundreds of millions of pounds every year in marketing and sales, that's not a lot to go on. So you need to get a little bit more accurate and have a deeper understanding as to whether people really like something or not. So we are an emotions company. We look at biometric signals in your body language. So right now, a little bit nervous, wavery voice, you know, a little bit afraid. We also look at facial expressions, we look at eye contact, we look at all those types of things. In the case of content and storytelling, it comes down to people interacting with their device. So we look specifically at how people watch and consume the content from an engagement perspective through facial codes. Yeah. So as you see there, we're actually tracking 48 different muscle groups on the face. We do that in real time. We're tracking at about 15 frames per second. And we're looking for those microfacial muscle movements that you've probably heard about in shows like Lie to Me and stuff like that. What I think is fascinating here is that we then rolled this out for the BBC across the US, Australia, and the UK. Got about 40,000 faces against 28 pieces of content to understand how people reacted to these. This is kind of what the study looks like. You see your trailer there, you have your rating, you could do whether you're going to share it, not share it. We did a lot more that's BBC proprietary stuff around it to understand their initial segments. And then we get into the distribution and psychometric questions. And it gives us something like this, which is a nice little time series that says how somebody reacted throughout the film. And then we also have another one that I'm going to explain a little bit more in detail later on. But this was all a test. We need to see, did it actually work? So let's put it right into use. Two things that we confirmed that I think we all know, but was always very hard to justify. One, people don't always say what they do. And they certainly don't know how to articulate how they feel. Another thing is, it's not a one-size-fits-all in the content or storytelling business. I think we all know that. The question is, how do we actually make that possible and making it super bespoke? So we created something called the Say versus Do, Real Original. And what it is, it takes your 5-star rating and it puts it against your emotions and your emotion time series. Now, a time series is an interesting piece of data because it acts on a continuum, whereas the rating is a single point in time. So that's your rational thought saying 4 stars. But how did you get to 4 stars? Some people may have got there with a happiness spike at the beginning, others with a happiness spike at the end. So what we had to do is look at the different ways of measuring that out, and we found things like puzzlement drives appreciation in dramas across the UK, US, and Australia. But if you want it to be successful in the US, you have to also have happiness, surprise, and an element of disgust. Those are the things that correlate. they also tend to overscore a lot. Everything's awesome. So what you have here is kind of 4 quadrants. And in the middle there, you have kind of your average. And if you're on the left-hand side of the average on engagement, this means that you're engaging lower than the average and not as much as people would on the right-hand side. Same with the vertical. You've got your average, your midpoint, and if you're above that, you love it, particularly if you're above it on the right. If you're below that, that's your guilty pleasure category. And we're going to talk about a guilty pleasure because I think they're always fascinating. So these are shows like, for men, 50 Shades of Grey, that one cropped up there. Geordie Shore, for anyone who's been watching that around here, those types of shows. So this is the results from a study that we did in Australia. And as you could see, at number 5, the show that will not be named, is one of the top 4 scoring engagement, or top 5 scoring engagement shows, yet it is the lowest scoring appreciation. And this was sent to market. It hadn't been laid out yet. This was all pre-showing or airing of any of the shows. And what was interesting about this is we got some of the results back. And we found that we have a gem. And this started to prove consistent across a lot of the different shows. The guilty pleasures are great gem shows. They help support major brands. And what is great about this show is that it overperforms. In fact, it was driving some numbers that were predominantly unseen in market. And this was all before they even sent the show down there. The research itself takes about a week, and you just have to have your trailers and your content. And I think it's one of those fascinating things that we can get into when we start to blend sensory data with the other types of data sources. That's all I got for you today.
Thank you, Matt. And just another opportunity to say that we're all at the BBC Worldwide stand for the entire time. So come and see. I did a demo this morning, showed all my facial expressions of how I felt about everything. It's incredible. It's really worth doing. And next up, we have Josh, who's going to talk to us about Rhiza.
Hi, everybody. My name is Josh, and I'm a co-founder and CEO of Rhiza. And I want to start with some basic storytelling here around 2 different families. So in Denver, Colorado, we have a couple, and they're kind of geeky, and they like going to trade shows and Comic-Cons and places like that. And in Mumbai, we have a family. Now, what do these 2 groups or audiences have in common? They're both consumers of BBC content, and specifically Doctor Who. They're Doctor Who watchers. That is actually one of the only things that they have in common from the data that we've been able to find. And yet, in general, in the media industry, what we find, people market content in the same ways, regardless of where people are and the context in which they're living. Doctor Who is aired in over 189 different countries. Then within each country, we see variations of the context of who people are, what types of marketing they respond to, what types of other shows they are engaging with, how they even watch the show. Do they consume it on a television? Do they consume it on their mobile phone, whatever it might be? And understanding those differences is key to being effective in how you market and promote content around the world. We've also found and had great success with other media clients that it also helps if you are selling advertising along with shows as well. So, but the problem is that knowing your audience is very hard. There's amazingly cool new data sets coming about, and we just heard about one from Matt. I mean, I think their technology is amazing. There are 3 other companies over at the BBC Labs that are all doing really cool things with measurement that are blowing it out of the park. But they're just 3 data points, sets of data points among potentially thousands that broadcasters, media companies, and show creators, content creators have to choose from in terms of how they want to measure things and put things together. And as we have new technology emerging, like Matt was just talking about, we are seeing more and more and more. There are hundreds of thousands of vertical media channels now that exist, all micro channels basically, and to market effectively to them, you have to be able to bring all that data together in some way. So, I was asked to present today what we're doing for the BBC and how we're doing it. So basically, the way it works is we are taking data from many different sources. So ratings data from commercial providers and third parties, demographic information, sales performance data, social media data, as well as survey data from within the BBC. That's being generated, a global survey, and we have a demo of that going over at our booth, and you can go see that data. And we bring all that information together into a common platform, so one central data repository that basically allows everyone to use a common set of tools to pull out the bits of information that they need to tell a more effective story, and we have a bunch of features that do that. But what we focus on specifically is getting our customers to the answers that they want to specific business questions. So it's not data for data's sake, but it's actually data that helps drive business decisions. That's kind of what we focus on. So how can they actually improve show performance in markets where shows might be failing or not doing as well as they want? How can they make better content investment decisions? Once again, content, just because it didn't do well in one market or just via linear television doesn't necessarily mean that it won't do well in a digital environment or in another continent or country. Customer and market segmentation, finding better audiences specifically, all of these types of business use cases can be found through connecting different bits of data together. And we were having this conversation earlier. The bits of data that you can connect together are getting better and better over time. And as they do, what we try to do with our tool is just make it easy to swap one in for another. So if you have a ratings data source in one country and you want to use a different ratings data source in another, it's easy to do. That sort of flexibility helps media companies, especially in terms of that are acting across a global market, pivot and be much more agile than they have been in the past. So one of the things I just want to really keep focusing on, these types of questions that are flowing past us are the types of questions that our customers in general are asking of data. And our focus is to make sure that business questions and the answers that are actually going to drive business decisions are the reason why we're doing all this. We don't want anyone to be thinking of data as spreadsheets or raw numbers and all that other stuff. It's the insights that you can get out of it that are where the real power of. And for the BBC, we've been able to help them in understanding who their partners should be and the analysis of those partners, the types of content that they're looking at and that's going to appeal to people, and quite frankly, the marketability of the different types of brands and channels and content that they're distributing throughout the world. So I want to thank everybody for coming out today. It's great to see a good audience here. And I really want to encourage everybody to come visit the BBC booth over there to get more information. We'd love to talk to you and be able to share more of what we do in depth. So thank you very much.
Great. Thanks, Josh. I think we've got some time now for some questions from the audience. If anyone has any thoughts. Sorry, there's a...
Oh, yeah.
When you speak about your tools, it looks to me that if it's very interesting for BBC, so that the supply of programming, but if you look on the other side, so the demand for programming, so if I'm a buyer, what can this system mean for me? And is it done afterwards, because then I've already made a decision, then I know why I have a failure or why I have a success, but can it influence my decision also, do you think?
So my answer to that question is a tool itself, right, that helps you bring together data from lots of different sources is only good as the data that you're bringing together. So if you're trying to do an anticipatory or predictive modeling, for example, our tool would be fed by data providers that have that type of predictive modeling associated with them. And we have one here in the BBC Labs area. I'm blanking on, that's Parrot, thank you. Parrot Analytics has a bunch of that type of data. I think you guys would be able to do that as well.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a really good question because, first of all, we're working with BBC Worldwide, and I need to be really clear on that one. Worldwide isn't just about content production. It is about getting content out there to 100 different markets in the world. So when we were brought in, it wasn't just about how the UK market reacted. It was actually more about how are the Americans looking at it, how are the Latin Americans looking at it, how are the Australians looking at it, and looking at all those different markets. So I think it's really important to think that a good story can be told over and over and over again. I mean, that's what it comes down to. So it's about redefining those niches. And Netflix, I think, has proved that for us time and time again. So
I think, if I could, in terms of also a methodology for looking ahead, if you are coming up with content, right, and you're trying to decide, is it going to be marketable or not, understanding who you might be targeting with that content first, right, is a place to start. And then and our tool certainly does this, but you are able to connect the dots to other correlated behaviors that you can see out of those people, and know that, okay, people who are like this also, it's the Amazon.com sort of shopping model, but for content instead. So people who are like this tend to also like this type of show, tend to also consume this type of media in this way. And you can start to look at the differences in different markets so that you can actually start predicting ahead. We had a very engaging conversation this morning with a producer who was interested in understanding why certain shows get canceled, right? And how can he avoid creating a show that is just going to get canceled? And there's a much longer conversation to be had, but connecting the dots among the various different data sources that can help you answer that question is really where we see that's the first place to start. There's no one answer, though, to your question. So that's the...
Great. Any other questions? Okay, I actually, it's less of a question, but just through chats over the last few days, you've both mentioned to me something that kind of stuck in my mind, and that is you both mentioned 60%. And you mentioned it in different ways, but it actually really gave me personally a sense of what it is that each of your companies do. So I just thought I'd probe a bit on that. So I think for Rhiza, you mentioned that 60% of the work that we do around data is actually data collection, and that there's so much less time then left for the analysis and the interpretation.
So yes, across our customers, we're constantly monitoring how people are using information and consuming it. So what we found is that analysts and researchers at media companies spend about 60% of their time just going out to the different data silos where different data is.
Just to get it,
just
let alone
to,
to read it.
Yeah. And then what usually happens, and I'm speaking generally here, of course, is they bring that data and try to smush it all together into a spreadsheet. So they can then make a presentation to people that they need to change their minds of. And that whole process, 60% of time can be saved by bringing it all together into one platform. But then you also have tons of error rate that comes in when you have people manually pulling data down from one source and trying to cram it into a pivot table in a spreadsheet. And so the efficiencies that you can start to gain are pretty incredible.
Yeah, and so it struck me as well then when, Matt, you mentioned just this morning that 60% of our decision-making process, stop me if I'm wrong, is made by the subconscious already. So again, we're talking about huge efficiencies for both. Yeah, for both. Yeah.
Yeah, I think we got Patrick. Patrick here. So Patrick is our experimental psychologist. He's always a lot of fun to talk to, because you don't know whether you're actually under observation or not. But I think what's fascinating about the world of emotions, and my background is not in this area. It's simply the fact that I've lived away from home for about 7-8 years now, and I've only been working for 10. So when you go to new cultures, you understand that they're making decisions in a whole different way. They're coming either to a similar or a totally distant outcome. For me, it was obviously the learning the British interested. That was a fun one. But when you get to that, and I mean, I think I always come back to, if you ever ask somebody how they knew they were in love, people have a really tough time articulating that. And it's because that decision just gets made for you. And when you're talking about content, you're talking about something that, I mean, we talk about love a lot in content. We talk about love in storytelling. And we talk about happiness and these types of things that are really, really difficult to articulate. And so what often happens is, what was it? Is it 800 milliseconds? Something like that? No? More or less? But about 800 milliseconds before even that information, you've got 11 million bits per second going in. Like right now, we got all that noise going on. You got all this stuff happening, and you're filtering it all out. Only 40 bits per second goes into your rational brain. So that's how much is getting filtered out by your subconscious, your emotional side. And so how do we actually capture that in a physiological way, and that's kind of where we play. That's our domain, and that's what we find fascinating, because you will get a lot of answers there. People post-rationalize different decisions, but you'll always get a lot of answers before that happens.
So 60% savings in efficiency from both your companies on different plans. Is there any other questions from the audience? Anything else? Thank you.
Hello. It's a question for Rhiza. Your slide that you put up where you've got all this data going into a sort of central point of analysis, how much of that are you able to kind of link one piece of behavioural data to others, or are you modelling all of that out? So how much of it is a linear line of one person's activity?
So as a policy, we actually do not do any linking between data sets. And that is, we layer data together in our systems so that incorrect or bad correlations won't be able to be made. That being said, there are many data providers and data companies out there that we partner with that do, in fact, link across many different data sets. And so what that allows is for us to know that the same person that was watching TV at this time is the same person that registered this type of vehicle, that is the same person. And what we do specifically when we bring that data in as a policy is strip out all of the identifiable information about the people. So we don't have any information stored in any of our systems that ties, I don't know that it's you. I know that it's somebody like you that lives maybe in the postal code that you live in, but there is not enough information for me to be able to identify specifics. And our media partners, especially because of regulatory environments all around the world, it helps protect them a lot by stripping out all that information, but having the third parties do the connecting bits and then stripping it out on the way in.
Right,
if that makes sense.
Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah, so just on that, actually, one of the things we talk a lot about at BBC Worldwide is this notion of the overload of data. And obviously, I mentioned at the beginning that one of our main jobs is making sure that we communicate that effectively. And one analogy that we talked about, that Josh mentioned, in relation to how they do that, how they actually build, I guess, I think our boss calls it data with guardrails. So you have the data, but it's within a particular parameter. And you had another great analogy on this.
Yeah, so my kids are 10 and 13, and when we first started taking them bowling, at bowling lanes, we would put up the guardrails right on the side. So whenever they threw the ball down the alley, they would always hit a pin, right? They wouldn't always get a strike, but they would at least hit a pin. And part of what we try to do in how our tools enable connecting together different types of data sets in presentations. So, looking at car buying behavior and then, consumption behavior and then maybe emotional behavior in the next slide, is to do it in such a way that in a templated way that allows salespeople and marketers and even executives at companies to be able to, basically hit the point. They may not hit the strike, they might not get it exactly right, but the researchers know that they're not completely screwing it up. And that's a very fine line that we work a lot on in terms of how those tools are made available to different people throughout an enterprise. And doing that with guardrails helps.
Yeah, research may not be able to get you a definitive strike, but we hope that it'll keep you out of the gutter. I think
Very good. Yeah. Very good.
Great. So we're actually, our time is kind of coming up. If there's any other questions? If not, please do join us at our booth. We're there for the next few days. There's live demos. You can chat to all the guys and our two other companies who are also part of BBC Labs, Affinio and Parrot. And thank you very much for joining us today.